The rain fell in relentless, slanting sheets, blurring the opulent lights of the Sterling Grand Hotel into a watercolor wash of gold and white. Inside the climate-controlled silence of the lobby, a man named Richard Sterling, no relation to the hotel, a fact that would soon become exquisitely ironic, stared out at the deluge with profound irritation. He was a man for whom the world was meant to bend, and the weather was currently failing to cooperate. His 60th birthday celebration was at risk of being dampened, not by the rain, but by the incompetence of others. And his gaze, sharp and critical, fell upon the one person he always designated as the primary source of life's irritations, his son-in-law, Liam. Liam stood a few feet away, a quiet island in the sea of his wife's family. He held a simple, worn, leather-bound journal in one hand, its presence a stark contrast to the gleaming marble floors and crystal chandeliers. He was a man who seemed to take up less space than he occupied, his posture one of unassuming patience. To Richard, he looked exactly like what he was, a failure. A freelance architect, Richard would snort to his friends, which was a polite term for a man who struggled to find work and lived off the grace of his far more successful wife, Sarah. Sarah, who stood between her father and her husband, was a portrait of anxious tension, her smile as fragile as a pane of sugar glass. "Well?" Richard's voice boomed, cutting through the hushed elegance of the lobby. He addressed the young man at the check-in counter, not as a person, but as an obstacle. "You told me on the phone that the reservations were confirmed. The Sterling suite for myself and my wife, and an executive king for my son Daniel, and a junior suite for my daughter and him." He flicked a dismissive hand in Liam's direction, without even gracing him with a look. The desk clerk, a young man named Ben, swallowed nervously. "Yes, sir, Mr. Sterling. I see the reservations here, but there appears to be a system-wide glitch. It's showing the entire hotel as fully booked. I can't access any of the rooms, not even the ones under your name." Richard's face, already florid, deepened to a shade of plum. "A glitch? I'm celebrating my 60th birthday. I have booked the grand ballroom for tomorrow night. I am paying this establishment a small fortune, and you're telling me you've lost our rooms because of a glitch? I'm terribly sorry, sir. We're working on it." Richard let out a laugh devoid of all humor. It was a harsh, barking sound. He turned his glare onto Liam, who had remained silent, his gaze sweeping the lobby, taking in the architecture, the flow of staff, the subtle details of the guest experience. "This is just our luck, isn't it? Tied to him." He gestured again at his son-in-law. "The man is a walking black cloud of misfortune. I bet if he hadn't come, the rooms would be ready and waiting." Eleanor, Richard's wife, a woman whose face was a smooth mask of expensive creams and practiced indifference, laid a placating hand on her husband's arm. "Now, Richard, it's not the boy's fault." The word boy was a weapon, neatly polished and expertly deployed. It made Liam, a man of 34, sound like an irresponsible child. "Isn't it?" Richard shot back. "Everything he touches turns to dust. Look at him, standing there like a lost puppy. Can't even provide a decent roof over his own wife's head without my help, and now he can't even get a hotel room that's already been paid for." The accusation was ludicrous, but the venom was real. Sarah flinched. "Dad, please, it's a computer error." "I'll tell you what the error was," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet carrying whisper. "The error was you marrying a man with no ambition, no prospects, a man who sketches in a little notebook all day instead of making a real living." He looked at Liam directly for the first time, a sneer twisting his lips. "What's in that book, Liam? Pictures of all the big houses you'll never build? Or just a list of all the things you can't afford?" Liam met his gaze. His eyes were a calm, steady gray, like a placid sea before a storm. He didn't rise to the bait. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, as if considering the question. Then he looked at his wife, Sarah. He saw the shame in her eyes, the desperate plea for him to just endure it, to not make a scene. He saw her love for him warring with a lifetime of ingrained fear of her father. And in that moment, he knew this weekend would not be like all the other weekends. This humiliation would be the last. Richard Sterling thought he was a failure, a broke and ambitionless man. He didn't know that Liam didn't just have a reservation at the Sterling Grand. He owned it. And within 24 hours, Richard's entire world, built on the fragile foundations of wealth and status, was going to be demolished. If you're enjoying this story so far, I know you're going to love what comes next. Do me a quick favor and tap that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the fallout. And just for fun, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. All right, let's get back to the lobby, where things are about to get much, much worse for Liam before they get so much better. The family stood as a tableau of dysfunction in the magnificent lobby. Richard paced like a caged tiger, his expensive Italian loafers squeaking softly on the polished marble. Eleanor examined her manicure with an air of detached martyrdom, while their son Daniel scrolled through his phone, blissfully indifferent to the unfolding drama. Sarah stood frozen, a human bridge between two warring territories, slowly being torn apart by the strain. And Liam was observing. He had long ago learned that the most valuable information was gathered in silence. "Well, what are we supposed to do?" Richard demanded of the universe at large, though his eyes were fixed on Liam. "Stand here all night? Some of us have important plans." He made important plans sound like a concept utterly alien to Liam's existence. "Sarah, your husband is supposed to be the man. What's his solution?" The question hung in the air, thick with malice. It was designed to expose Liam's powerlessness, to corner him. Sarah turned to him, her expression a mess of apology and desperation. "Liam, can you think of anything?" Before Liam could even open his mouth, Richard scoffed. "What's he going to do? Offer to build us a new hotel from scratch with his little crayons? We need a practical solution, for God's sake." He turned back to the quaking desk clerk. "Is there a manager? I demand to speak to a manager." Liam watched the exchange, a strange sense of calm descending over him. The anger he used to feel in these moments, the hot sting of shame, had cooled over the years into something harder, more focused. It had become fuel. For years he had endured this. At family dinners, Richard would loudly ask about Liam's little projects, always with a tone that implied they were flights of fancy, like a child's Lego creations. He would offer Liam unsolicited and insulting financial advice, often slipping him a $100 bill at the end of the night with a patronizing, "Here, son, take your wife out to a decent meal for once." Each insult, each condescending gesture was a small cut. Liam had borne them for Sarah's sake, believing that his love for her was strong enough to withstand the constant erosion of his dignity. He had kept his success a secret for a reason that had seemed noble at the time. When his company, built from a single, brilliant design into a global chain of boutique luxury hotels, had truly taken off, he'd made a conscious decision. He wanted to be sure that Sarah's love and her family's acceptance, if it ever came, was for him, Liam the man, the quiet architect, the person she'd fallen in love with, not for Liam Sterling, the billionaire hotelier. It was a test, a foolishly romantic and deeply naive one, and he was beginning to see that it was a test they were all failing spectacularly. His greatest disappointment was not Richard. Richard was a known quantity, a predictable brute whose worldview was dictated entirely by bank statements. No, the deepest wound was Sarah. He remembered a dinner 6 months prior. Richard had spent the entire evening mocking a new hotel that had opened downtown, calling its design pretentious and its owner an upstart. "Probably some tech bro with more money than sense," Richard had declared. Liam, who had personally sketched the initial designs for that very hotel on a napkin, had simply taken a sip of his wine. He had glanced at Sarah, hoping for a flicker of defense, a simple, "Dad, that's enough." But she had just stared down at her plate, her silence a deafening consent. Now in this lobby, that silence was echoing. She was letting it happen again. Her loyalty was divided, and in a divided loyalty, the aggressor always wins. "Sir, the manager is on her way down," the clerk Ben stammered to Richard. "She'd better be," Richard grumbled. He then turned his full attention back to Liam, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You know, there's a perfectly simple solution to at least part of this problem." He paused for dramatic effect. "Liam, there's a motel about 3 miles down the highway. The Starlight Inn, I think it's called. Probably has rooms for $50 a night. That seems more your speed. Why don't you head down there and check in? We'll call you if we get this sorted out and manage to find a cot to stick in the corner of Daniel's room for Sarah." The cruelty of the suggestion was breathtaking. It wasn't just an insult. It was an act of social expulsion. He was casting Liam out, physically removing him from the family circle. Daniel actually looked up from his phone, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Eleanor's mask of indifference slipped for a second, revealing a hint of alarm. This was going too far, even for Richard. But it was Sarah's reaction that Liam watched. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened as if to protest. He saw the words form on her lips. "No, Dad, that's horrible." But they never came out. Her gaze met her father's, and the defiance died. She looked away down at the floor, her shoulders slumping in defeat. And that was it. That was the moment the dam broke. The quiet, patient, long-suffering Liam receded, and the architect, the man who built a global empire on precision, vision, and an intolerance for structural weakness, took his place. The insults weren't just words anymore. They were data points. The family's behavior wasn't just a personal failing. It was a systemic issue that needed to be addressed. Liam gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's a very generous suggestion, Richard," he said, his voice even and low. "But I think I'll stay. I'm starting to find the situation educational." He deliberately made eye contact with Ben, the desk clerk, and gave him a subtle, reassuring nod. The boy looked startled, but a fraction of the terror left his face. Liam's gaze then drifted up, past the massive crystal chandelier, to the intricate coffered ceiling he had designed to mimic the overlapping petals of a rose. He had spent 2 months perfecting that design. Richard saw an expensive ceiling. Liam saw a story of effort, artistry, and immense hidden value. The irony was so thick he could taste it. The stage was set. The players were in their places. Richard thought he was the director of this little drama, but he was merely a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. A woman in a sharp black suit, the floor manager, finally arrived, her face a mask of professional stress. "Mr. Sterling? I'm Sandra, the evening manager. I am so sorry for this inconvenience." Richard puffed out his chest, ready for battle. "Inconvenience? Madam, this is a catastrophe. My family is stranded in your lobby." Liam watched them, then quietly slipped his phone from his pocket. He turned away from the group, toward a window overlooking a rain-slicked courtyard he designed to be a quiet Zen garden. He shielded the screen with his body and sent a single text message to a number saved under the name HG. The message was simple. Stage 1 initiated. Design flaw identified in lobby. Proceed with protocol alpha. The architect is on site. He slid the phone back into his pocket and turned back to the scene, his expression unchanged. He felt a cool sense of purpose settle over him. For years, he had played the part of the humble, struggling artist. It was a role he had chosen, a cloak of invisibility. But Richard and his family had mistaken the costume for the man. They had prodded and pushed and humiliated him, never once suspecting that the quiet man in the corner didn't just have a seat at the table. He owned the entire building. The performance was about to end, and the final act, he promised himself, would be unforgettable. Sandra, the evening manager, was doing her best to placate a man who was fundamentally unplateable. She spoke in the soothing, circular language of customer service, promising to escalate, to explore every option, to personally investigate the technical issue. Richard, in turn, was reveling in his role as the aggrieved party, his voice growing louder, his gestures more expansive, with every apology she offered. "We have a team of IT specialists working remotely on the server at this very moment, sir," Sandra explained, her smile strained but holding. "We hope to have it resolved shortly." "Shortly isn't good enough," Richard boomed. "My wife is tired. My birthday weekend is turning into a farce. This is the Sterling Grand, not some flea-bitten motel." He shot another pointed look at Liam, who simply leaned against a marble pillar, his journal held loosely in one hand. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not a man at the epicenter of a family crisis. His calm seemed to infuriate Richard more than any argument could. Liam, meanwhile, was using the time productively. He let the noise of Richard's tirade fade into the background and focused on his surroundings. He wasn't just looking at the lobby, he was auditing it. He noted the slight scuff marks on the baseboard near the main entrance. The cleaning crew needed to be more diligent. He saw a server in the adjacent lounge deliver a cocktail to a guest, but she didn't make eye contact or offer a follow-up. A minor training issue, but a lapse nonetheless. He observed the flow of foot traffic from the entrance to the elevators, confirming that his design, intended to draw people naturally toward the heart of the hotel, was working as planned. His mind, accustomed to dealing with complex systems, was processing dozens of data points per second. This was his creation, his empire, and he was seeing it through the eyes of its ultimate authority. He excused himself from the tense circle, murmuring something about needing a glass of water. None of them paid him any mind. To them, he was simply retreating, a dog slinking away with its tail between its legs. Liam walked calmly toward the far end of the lobby, past the grand staircase and toward a discreet, unmarked door he knew led to a service corridor. He didn't go through it. Instead, he stopped by a quiet alcove furnished with a single armchair and a small table, designed for exactly this purpose, a private moment in a public space. He pulled out his phone again. This time, he made a call. It was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and utterly professional. It belonged to Henry Garrison, the general manager of the entire Sterling Grand global portfolio. Garrison was more than an employee. He was Liam's most trusted lieutenant, a man who understood both the hotel business and Liam's philosophy with equal clarity. "Mr. Harrison," Liam said, his voice low. He often used his mother's maiden name, Harrison, as a code when in public. "It seems we have a live fire stress test in the main lobby of the flagship." There was a brief pause. "I received your text, sir. Protocol Alpha is in motion. The external IT team has been given their script. They will find a server error that affects all rooms except for a handful we've designated. How would you like to proceed with the asset allocation?" The language was precise, the coded speech of their long-standing arrangement for when Liam wanted to move anonymously through his own properties. "The main party is a group of 4, Richard, Eleanor, Daniel, and Sarah Sterling," Liam said, the name Sterling tasting like ash in his mouth when applied to them. "Richard is the primary antagonist. He's currently berating the evening manager. Sandra, a good employee, loyal, she'll be fine," Harrison said, his tone reassuring. "I know," Liam replied. "Let's make one room available. The smallest single queen on the second floor. The one overlooking the ventilation systems for the kitchen." Harrison didn't question the odd specificity. He understood immediately. "The least desirable room in the hotel." "Understood. And for you and Mrs. Sterling?" "For now, we are part of the antagonist party. He will be given the opportunity to allocate the single available resource. We will observe his choice." "A fascinating psychological experiment, sir," Harrison noted, a hint of admiration in his voice. "And the reservations for the ballroom and the presidential suite?" Leave them locked in the system for now. Let Richard believe everything is in jeopardy. I want him to feel the full weight of his perceived powerlessness. Liam's fingers tightened on his phone. Henry, he suggested I check into the Starlight Inn. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The Starlight Inn was a notoriously run-down motel on the outskirts of town, a place known for hourly rates and police visits. For Richard to suggest it was the ultimate expression of contempt. I see, Harrison said, his voice now cold as steel. Consider it noted, sir. The consequences will be proportional. Is there anything else? Just one more thing, Liam said, his eyes flicking back toward the family. He could see Richard stabbing a finger in the air, his face a mask of indignation. Ensure that when the time comes, all of Richard's credit cards are declined. Not just here. I want his corporate account with the Sterling Grand Collection flagged for immediate, system-wide review. Let's see how a man who lives by the numbers reacts when his numbers suddenly add up to zero. Consider it done, sir, Harrison replied. The architect will have his canvas. Thank you, Henry. Liam ended the call and took a deep, steadying breath. He felt no malice, no petty glee. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reestablishing equilibrium. It was about structural integrity. Richard's entire worldview was a poorly constructed edifice built on a foundation of arrogance and disrespect. Liam was simply going to apply a little pressure and watch it collapse under its own weight. He walked back to the group just as Sandra, the manager, was holding up a hand to silence Richard. Sir, I've just received an update. Her voice was filled with a carefully manufactured tone of relief. Our technicians have managed to open up a single block in the system. It seems we have one room. Just one. I am so sorry. It's a standard queen room. Richard's eyes lit up with predatory triumph. He had won. Through sheer force of will, he had bent the universe to his command and manifested a room. He looked around at his family, the conquering hero, and his gaze inevitably settled on Liam. The solution was so obvious, so perfect. The family had migrated from the lobby to the hotel's dimly lit, sophisticated bar. The single-room key, a small plastic rectangle of immense symbolic power, sat in the center of their table. Richard had placed it there like a trophy. The mood was strangely festive, at least for Richard and Eleanor. They had overcome adversity. They had secured a foothold. Well, it's not ideal, Richard announced, swirling the amber liquid in his whiskey glass. But it's a start, a testament to what a little persistence can achieve. He looked pointedly at Liam. Some people just give up. Others make things happen. Liam said nothing. He was nursing a glass of sparkling water, his journal resting on the table beside it. He had opened it to a blank page and was sketching idly, a complex geometric pattern that seemed to grow organically from the center of the page. Sandra, the manager, had explained that the glitch was still being worked on, but that this one room had been secured for them. The original reservations for the Sterling Suite and the others were still in digital limbo. We'll of course move you the moment they become available, she had promised, her performance flawless. Now the question of the single room had to be addressed. It was a lifeboat built for one, and they were a party of 5. It's obvious, isn't it? Eleanor said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Daniel, you can have the room. You're the youngest, you'll be fine on your own. Richard and I will, well, I suppose we can wait here in the lounge. It's comfortable enough. Her tone was that of a queen volunteering to sleep in the stables for the good of her kingdom. Daniel, who had been hoping to escape to a room and play video games, shrugged. Whatever, it's fine. Richard shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. He was savoring this moment. No, that's not the right solution. He picked up the key card, turning it over in his fingers. This is a family celebration. We need to think about the family. His eyes, filled with a cruel, calculating light, landed on Sarah. Sarah, darling, he began, his voice dripping with paternal concern. You and Liam can take the room." Sarah looked surprised, then relieved. "Oh, Dad, thank you. That's very generous." Richard held up a hand. Let me finish." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You, Sarah, can have the bed. It's only fair. As for Liam," he paused, letting the silence stretch. "Well, the floor is carpeted, isn't it? I'm sure he's slept in worse places. It's a roof over your head, which is more than he seems capable of providing on his own." The smile he gave Liam was pure poison. It was a masterclass in humiliation, disguised as a practical solution. He wasn't just giving them the room, he was dictating the terms of their occupancy, reinforcing Liam's lowly status even in a supposed moment of reprieve. He was making Liam a guest in his own marriage, a squatter on the floor of his wife's life. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, come on, that's a bit rough." "Rough?" Richard chuckled. "It's called character building, son. Something your brother-in-law could use a dose of." All eyes turned to Liam. He hadn't stopped sketching. The pattern on the page had grown more intricate, a beautiful, labyrinthine design that seemed to draw the eye inward. He looked up from his journal, his gray eyes unreadable. He looked at Sarah, who was staring at her father, her mouth slightly agape, a look of horrified disbelief on her face. For the first time all evening, she looked truly angry on his behalf. It was a flicker of the woman he'd married. "Actually, Richard," Liam said, his voice quiet, but cutting through the tension like a razor, "I have a better idea." He closed his journal with a soft snap. The sound was unnervingly final. "You and Eleanor should take the room," he said. Richard was taken aback. "What?" "You're the guest of honor," Liam continued smoothly. "It's your birthday. You should have the comfort and privacy. Sarah and I can wait. We're used to it." The last three words were delivered without a trace of self-pity, which made them all the more devastating. He was holding up a mirror, showing them their own behavior. Richard was momentarily flustered, his script thrown off. This was not the reaction he'd expected. He'd expected either a sullen acceptance or a weak protest, both of which he could have used as further ammunition. This calm, logical deflection was something new. "Don't be ridiculous," Richard stammered, recovering. "It's a single queen bed. What are Eleanor and I supposed to do?" "I don't know, Richard," Liam said, his gaze unwavering. "But you're the man who makes things happen. I'm sure you'll figure it out." He had taken Richard's own words and handed them back, stripped of their bravado and revealed for the empty boasts they were. A tense silence fell over the table. Sarah was looking at Liam with a new expression, a mixture of awe and fear. He had finally pushed back, not with anger, but with a quiet, unassailable logic. Then, as if on cue, a figure appeared at their table. It was a man in his late 50s, with silvering hair and an air of quiet authority that made Richard's bluster seem childish by comparison. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of genuine, not performative wealth. He completely ignored Richard, Eleanor, and Daniel. His eyes were fixed solely on Liam. "Mr. Harrison," the man said, his voice a low, respectful baritone, "my sincerest apologies for not greeting you upon your arrival. I was in a meeting with the board from our Asian Pacific division." Liam stood up, shaking the man's hand. "Henry, it's good to see you." "Don't worry about it. I prefer to arrive unannounced. It gives me a more authentic view of the operation." Richard stared, dumbfounded. "Who the devil is this?" he demanded, his authority completely undercut by the man's pointed disregard. "Liam, do you know this man?" Liam turned, a small, cold smile on his face. "Family, I'd like you to meet Henry Garrison. He's the general manager," he paused, "of the entire Sterling Grand collection." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's jaw dropped. Eleanor looked utterly bewildered, but it was Richard's face that was the true spectacle. The arrogant, triumphant mask crumbled, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. The gears were turning in his head, but the pieces weren't fitting. A freelance architect who was on a first-name basis with the global head of one of the world's most exclusive hotel chains? It didn't compute. What? What is the meaning of this? Richard sputtered, looking from Liam to Harrison and back again. What's your business with him? Harrison, without being asked, pulled up a chair, his posture one of relaxed command. He looked at Richard as if he were an interesting but ultimately harmless insect. My business is Mr. Sterling's business, Harrison said, his gaze flicking to Liam. Then he corrected himself. My apologies. My business is Mr. Harrison's business. He gave Liam a knowing look. He prefers to use a pseudonym when inspecting his properties. The word hung in the air. His properties. The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. Richard stared at Liam, his son-in-law, the failure, the man he'd just offered to let sleep on the floor. He saw not the shiftless artist he'd always mocked, but a stranger. A man who held a power so vast, so complete, that he didn't even need to display it. He had simply lived with it, quietly, while they had all danced around him, blind to the truth. The carefully constructed artifice of the evening, of their entire relationship, had just been demolished. And standing in the rubble was Liam, no longer the quiet, unassuming man in the corner, but the architect of their impending ruin. The bar, which moments before had felt like a cozy, exclusive haven, now seemed like a courtroom. The low murmur of conversation from other tables, the gentle clinking of glasses, it all faded into a roaring silence that was centered on their small table. Richard's face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a surge of indignant rage. His properties? Richard echoed, his voice a strangled whisper. He turned a desperate, bewildered gaze on his daughter. Sarah? What is he talking about? Sarah was ashen. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide with a million questions. She was just as much in the dark as her father, and the realization that her own husband was a complete stranger to her was a blow more staggering than any financial revelation. Liam? She breathed. Liam met her gaze, and for a moment, the cool, strategic mask fell away, and she saw a flash of the pain he'd been hiding. It was a look that said, I wanted you to see me, not this. But the moment was for Richard. Liam turned his calm, analytical gaze back to his father-in-law. The time for subtlety was over. The time for quiet endurance was past. Now was the time for the truth, delivered with the clean, cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He's talking about the hotel, Richard, Liam said, his voice even. This one, the Sterling Grand, New York. He paused, letting the first blow land. And the one in London, and Paris, the resort in Bali, the new tower in Tokyo, all 27 of them. He picked up his worn leather journal from the table, the journal Richard had mocked. He opened it, not to his sketches, but to a page filled with neat, dense columns of numbers and locations. The Sterling Grand Collection. It's my company. I founded it 10 years ago. I designed the first hotel myself, and I've overseen the design and acquisition of every single one since. He let the journal fall open on the table. The evidence, in his own handwriting, was there for them all to see. Daniel let out a low whistle. Holy! He trailed off, staring at Liam as if seeing him for the first time. Eleanor just shook her head, muttering, I don't understand. I don't understand. Richard, however, was rallying his defenses. His mind, unable to accept this new reality, defaulted to its factory setting, denial. You're lying, he spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. This is a trick, a pathetic, elaborate joke to make me look foolish. Henry Garrison leaned forward, his expression hardening. I can assure you, sir, that no one here needs to work to make you look foolish. You are doing a remarkable job on your own. The insult was delivered with the icy precision of a master duelist. Mr. Sterling's ownership is a matter of public record for anyone who cared to look beyond their own assumptions. We simply maintain his privacy at his request. He has a habit of walking his properties as a guest to ensure the standards he set are being met. He calls it structural integrity assessment. The phrase hung in the air. Structural integrity. The architectural metaphor was suddenly, brutally clear. Liam wasn't just building hotels. He was testing the foundations of everything and everyone around him. The system glitch that made the rooms unavailable? Liam continued, his voice relentless. I initiated it with a text message when we arrived. I wanted to see what you would do, Richard, when faced with a minor inconvenience, when your perceived status was momentarily threatened. He looked at the single-room key still sitting on the table. I made one room available, the worst room in the hotel, the one next to the ice machine with a view of an air conditioning unit. I wanted to see how you would distribute that single, meager resource. He leveled his gaze at his father-in-law. And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided the best use of it was to offer my wife the bed and me the floor. You suggested I go to the Starlight Inn. His voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet. Tell me, Henry, what is the rack rate at the Starlight Inn these days? Harrison didn't miss a beat. I believe it's $49.95 a night, Mr. Sterling, though I hear they offer a discount for stays under 3 hours. The air crackled. The humiliation was absolute, the reversal of fortune complete. Richard, the man who defined himself by his wealth and his ability to command respect, had been exposed as a petty tyrant, a buffoon who had been unknowingly dancing on the strings of the man he despised. But your clothes, Eleanor stammered, grasping at straws. Your car, you live in that small apartment. I like my apartment. I designed it, Liam said simply. It's efficient. I don't like flashy clothes, and I prefer taking the subway. It's the best way to observe people, to see how they interact with the spaces around them. He looked at them, a deep, profound sadness in his eyes. My life is not a performance. I have never pretended to be poor. You all just assumed I was because I didn't flaunt my wealth, because my values are different from yours. You saw what you wanted to see, a failure, because my success wasn't measured in the same way you measure yours. Finally, he turned to Sarah. She was crying now, silent tears tracking through her makeup. Liam, why? Why didn't you tell me? Her voice was broken. This was the question that mattered. This was the conversation that would determine the rest of their lives. When, Sarah? He asked, his voice raw with years of accumulated pain. When should I have told you? The night your father called my design for the community center a charity case for a charity architect? Or the time he loaned us money for a down payment on a house I could have bought 10 times over with the money I made that week? He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the table. Or maybe I should have told you tonight, when you stood there, silent, while he told me to go sleep in a motel. When you let him offer me the floor like a dog. You are my wife. Your loyalty should have been to me, not to his money, not to his approval. He looked at Henry Harrison. Henry, the presidential suite, is it ready for us? It's always ready for you, sir, Harrison replied. Liam looked back at Sarah, his face a mask of disappointment. It seems my reservation is secure, after all. The statement was simple, devastating, final. He was talking about more than just a hotel room. He was talking about his place in the world, a place he had secured on his own, a place she had never even bothered to look for. The aftermath in the bar was a silent, devastating explosion. Liam's words lingered in the air, each one a piece of shrapnel that had found its mark. Richard sat slumped in his chair, his face gray. The blustering, arrogant titan of industry had vanished, replaced by a deflated old man who had just been shown the terrifying emptiness of his own values. He had built his entire identity on a mountain of money and status, and he had just discovered it was a molehill next to the Everest of Liam's quiet, hidden success. Eleanor was alternating between patting her husband's arm and shooting panicked, accusatory glances at Sarah, as if this were all her daughter's fault for bringing this Trojan horse of a man into their lives. Daniel just stared into his drink, looking mortified. He was the only one who seemed to grasp the sheer scale of their social and familial self-immolation. And Sarah was the epicenter of the blast. She was looking at the empty space where her husband had stood, and then at her family, and it was as if she were seeing them all for the first time through a clear lens, stripped of the fog of obligation and lifelong conditioning. She saw her father not as a powerful patriarch to be feared and obeyed, but as a cruel, petty bully. She saw her mother not as an elegant diplomat, but as a silent enabler, and she saw herself as a coward. Liam had turned to leave, his movements fluid and decisive. He had not looked back. Henry Garrison stood, a silent, imposing guard by his side. "Wait!" Sarah's voice cut through the silence. It was stronger than anyone had ever heard it. Liam stopped, but he didn't turn around. "Don't you walk away from me," she said, standing up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Don't you dare." Richard looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He expected his daughter to attack Liam, to defend the family's honor. "That's right, Sarah," he croaked. "He can't treat us like this." Sarah turned a look of such pure, undiluted fury on her father that he actually recoiled. "Us?" she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "There is no us anymore, Dad. You blew that up. You and your disgusting obsession with money and status." She turned back to Liam's unmoving form. "You owe me more than this, Liam. More than a public spectacle and a dramatic exit. You owe me a conversation. You owe your wife a conversation." Slowly, Liam turned to face her. The anger in his eyes had been replaced by a profound weariness. "I do," he agreed, his voice quiet. "But not here, not with them." Just then, a waiter approached the table, holding a small black bill folder. He approached Richard, who was still the most ostentatiously dressed man at the table. "Sir, your bill." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Put it on my corporate account, the Sterling account." He said the name as if it were a magic word. The waiter looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be a problem with the account. And your credit cards, they were also declined." Richard stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? That's impossible. Run it again." "We have, sir, 3 times." Henry Garrison stepped forward smoothly. "There is no need. I will handle the bill." He then looked at Richard, his expression devoid of any emotion. "Mr. Sterling," he said to Richard, deliberately using the name to twist the knife. "As of 10 minutes ago, your corporate account with the Sterling Grand Collection has been suspended, pending a full review of its alignment with our company's values. I believe our values clause includes a subsection on basic human decency. You, sir, have failed the audit." This was the final, crushing blow. It wasn't just a social humiliation, it was a practical, financial one. Richard's power, the only language he understood, had been switched off at the source. He looked at Liam, his face a mask of utter defeat. The bully had become the beggar. "Liam, son," he began, his voice pleading. Liam cut him off with a sharp, decisive gesture. "Don't," he said. The word was ice. "You have never, not once, seen me as a son. You've seen me as a line item on your family's balance sheet that didn't perform to your expectations. The account is closed, Richard, in every sense of the word." He then looked at Sarah. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. He held out a hand. It was not a command, but an invitation, a choice. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and clear, cutting through the wreckage. "The presidential suite is on the 48th floor. It has a beautiful view of the city. We can talk there. Or you can stay here and help your father figure out how to pay for his whiskey." The choice was stark. It was absolute. On one side, her past, her controlling father, her enabling mother, a lifetime of walking on eggshells in a world built on superficial values. On the other, her future, An unknown man who was her husband, a life of terrifying honesty, and a chance to finally stand on her own 2 feet. Her entire life had been leading to this single moment, this single choice. She looked at her father's pathetic, pleading face. She looked at her mother, who was already formulating a way to spin this, to smooth it over. She looked at Liam, standing there, offering her a hand that led to an entirely new world. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah took a step away from the table, and then another. She walked past her stunned family, past the wreckage of her old life, and took her husband's hand. His grip was warm and firm. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go talk." Without another word, they turned and walked away together, leaving Richard, Eleanor, and Daniel to sit in the ruins of their own making, with a bill they couldn't pay and a social debt that was utterly bankrupt. The reversal of fortune was complete. The humiliated were now the powerful, and those who had wielded power so cruelly now had none at all. The elevator ride to the 48th floor was a study in silence. The small, enclosed space was thick with unspoken words, a decade of misunderstandings and resentments compressed into a few hundred feet of vertical travel. Liam stood on one side, his gaze fixed on the ascending floor numbers. Sarah stood on the other, her arms wrapped around herself, looking at her husband's reflection in the polished brass doors. He was the same man she had married, yet he was a complete stranger. The quiet, gentle architect she loved was still there, but he was encased in this new, formidable identity, like a priceless statue she had mistaken for a simple stone. The doors chimed softly and opened directly into the presidential suite. The term suite was an understatement. It was a sprawling apartment, larger than their actual home, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The lights of the city glittered below like a carpet of scattered diamonds. A fire crackled in a modern fireplace, and soft music played from an unseen source. On a low table, a bottle of champagne was chilling in a silver bucket next to 2 crystal flutes. It was a scene of perfect, curated luxury. Liam walked to the window, his back to her, and stared out at the city he had, in a very real sense, conquered. Sarah remained by the door, feeling like an intruder. "You called me Harrison," Liam said, his voice quiet, reflective. "Back at the bar, you said my business was Mr. Harrison's business, my mother's maiden name." Sarah was confused. "What?" He turned to face her. "It's the name I use when I check into my hotels. A code. Only Henry and a few others know it. You heard it once, a long time ago when I was on the phone. You asked who Harrison was, and I told you he was a consultant." He gave a small, sad smile. "You remembered. Subconsciously, maybe, but you remembered." It was a strange olive branch, an acknowledgement that somewhere, deep down, she had been listening. "Liam, I don't understand any of this," she said, her voice trembling. "Why? Why would you hide this from me? Did you not trust me?" This was the heart of the matter. He crossed the vast room and stood before her, his expression serious. "No, Sarah, that's the irony. I trusted you too much. I trusted that your love for me was independent of all this." He gestured around the opulent suite. "When I met you, I was just starting out. I had one good design, a lot of debt, and a crazy dream. And you fell in love with that guy, the guy who sketched in a notebook and talked about light and space." He took her hands. They were cold. "When the money started coming in, truly coming in, I was terrified. Terrified it would change us. Terrified it would change you. And I saw what your family was like. I saw how much value they placed on all this." "So you made it a test," she whispered, the realization dawning. "It wasn't a test at first," he corrected gently. "It was a protection. I was protecting us, protecting that real thing we had. But then, your father, he started his campaign. The little digs, the insults, the constant implication that I was less of a man because my bank account wasn't his primary topic of conversation. And I wanted to see if you would defend me. Not Liam Sterling, the secret billionaire, But Liam, your husband, the man you chose. He let go of her hands and paced back to the window. And you didn't, Sarah. You stood by and you let it happen. You would apologize to me later, in private. You would tell me that's just how Dad is. You asked me to endure it for the sake of peace. But it wasn't peace. It was a slow, painful erosion of my respect. And yours. The truth of his words hit her with physical force. She remembered every time she had shushed him, every time she had pleaded with her eyes for him to just let it go. She had thought she was being a peacemaker, a diplomat, but he was right. She had been a collaborator in her own husband's humiliation. I was a coward, she said, the words tasting like poison. I've spent my whole life being afraid of my father, afraid of his anger, his disapproval. It was easier to let him hurt you than to stand up to him myself. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and shameful. I am so sorry, Liam. He came to her and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I know, he said, but being sorry isn't enough. That's what I learned tonight. There comes a point where you have to stop absorbing the damage and reinforce the structure. He looked around the suite. I designed this room, every detail, the way the light hits that wall in the morning, the acoustics, the specific thread count of the sheets. It's all built on a solid foundation of quality and integrity. Our marriage, it was built on a good foundation, Sarah, a great one. But we've let the fixtures get tarnished. We've let a hostile element compromise the integrity of the whole structure. He guided her to one of the plush sofas near the fire. The question is, can it be renovated? Or is it a teardown? This was it, the real choice. Not between her father and her husband, but between her old self and a new one. I love you, Liam, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not the owner of the Sterling Grand. I love the man who sketches in his journal and talks about light. The man who, I now realize, has been patiently waiting for his wife to finally grow up. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I want to renovate. I want to tear down the parts of me that are weak and afraid and build something stronger, with you, if you'll let me. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire. Liam studied her face, searching her eyes. He saw the shame, the regret, but for the first time, he also saw a flicker of steel. The woman who had stood up to her father in that bar was still here. Slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, we renovate. He reached over and poured the champagne. He handed a glass to her, their fingers brushing. It wasn't a celebration. It was a contract. A new beginning, built on the rubble of the old. They had a lot of work to do. But for the first time in a very long time, they were finally looking at the same blueprint. Down below, in the city that Liam owned, a broken family was trying to figure out how to get home. But up here, in the quiet of the 48th floor, a marriage was just beginning the long, arduous process of being rebuilt. The 6 months that followed were a period of careful, deliberate reconstruction. Liam had approached the crisis in his marriage the same way he approached a failing building, with a thorough assessment, a clear plan, and a commitment to rebuilding on a stronger foundation. There were no quick fixes, no easy apologies that could plaster over the deep cracks that had formed over years of neglect and disrespect. They began therapy, both together and individually. For Liam, it was about learning to communicate his needs and resentments before they fossilized into secret tests. He had to dismantle the fortress of self-reliance he had built around his heart and learn to be vulnerable with the one person who was supposed to be his partner. He had to accept that his silence had been a contributing factor, a form of passive aggression that, while understandable, was not constructive. For Sarah, the work was more profound. It was a complete deconstruction of her identity. Her therapy sessions were archaeological digs into her own psyche, uncovering the fossilized remains of her father's expectations and her mother's silent complicity. She learned that her role as peacemaker had been a lie she told herself to avoid conflict, and that true peace could not exist without justice and respect. She had to learn to develop her own voice, separate from her father's booming commands and her husband's quiet disappointment. There were difficult conversations that stretched late into the night in their now too small apartment, an apartment they stayed in because it was home. Liam, now open about his work, would spread blueprints across the floor, not for a new hotel, but for their new life. He would explain the principles of tensile strength in load-bearing walls, and she would see the metaphors for their relationship. She in turn started a journal of her own, not of sketches, but of words, the thoughts and feelings she had suppressed for a lifetime. Contact with her family was strained, then severed. Richard had tried to apologize a week after the incident. He'd shown up at their apartment, hat in hand, but his words were all wrong. He apologized for the misunderstanding and talked about how proud he now was of Liam's incredible achievements. He didn't apologize for the cruelty, the insults, or the years of disrespect. He was apologizing to the billionaire, not the man. He was trying to get his corporate account reinstated. Liam had listened patiently, then calmly explained the difference between remorse and regret. "You regret getting caught, Richard," he had said. "You don't feel remorse for your actions. You're like a man who regrets robbing a bank only because he got a life sentence. The apology is meaningless because the character behind it hasn't changed." He had wished him well and closed the door. They hadn't spoken since. The financial consequences for Richard had been severe. The loss of the Sterling Grand account was a significant blow to his company's prestige and bottom line. More than that, the story, in hushed and distorted forms, had leaked into their social circle. The tale of Richard Sterling being dressed down and financially neutered by the son-in-law he'd famously derided became a cautionary legend. His power, which was always based on the perception of others, evaporated overnight. He and Eleanor sold their large house and downsized, a move they framed as simplifying their lives. But everyone knew it for what it was, a retreat. Daniel had reached out to Liam once, a short, awkward text message that simply said, "I'm sorry for my dad, and for not saying anything. What you did was epic." Liam had responded, "Be better than him." It was the beginning of a tentative, separate relationship, a single shoot of green in a scorched field. One evening, about 8 months after the night at the hotel, Liam and Sarah were sitting on the balcony of their apartment. The city hummed below them. Liam was sketching in his journal, and Sarah was reading. It was a comfortable, easy silence. "What are you designing?" she asked, looking over at the page. It wasn't a building, it was a logo, a stylized tree with deep roots and spreading branches. Underneath were the words, "The Harrison Foundation." "Henry Garrison is retiring next year," Liam explained. "He wants to spend his time giving back. I thought I'd help." He looked at her. "The foundation will focus on funding scholarships for underprivileged students in architecture and urban planning, and providing seed money for community-led development projects. Building things that matter, not just things that make money." He turned to a fresh page in his journal. "I was thinking the first project could be a new community center. In that neighborhood your father once called a charity case." He smiled, a genuine, open smile. "I have some ideas for the design, but I was thinking, maybe you could head the outreach committee. Find out what the community actually needs, instead of what some rich guy thinks they need." Sarah looked at him, her heart full. This was the man she had fallen in love with. Not the powerful hotelier, not the secret billionaire, but the visionary, the builder, the man who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. And he was inviting her to build it with him. He wasn't testing her anymore. He was trusting her. He was seeing her as a partner. "I would love that," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have some ideas of my own." She had found her voice. She had reinforced her own structure. Their renovation was far from over, but the foundation was solid. It was built not on secrecy and tests, but on a shared vision of honesty, respect, and a love that was strong enough to withstand the truth. They had learned the most important architectural lesson of all. The most beautiful and enduring structures are the ones that are transparent, the ones where the integrity of the design is visible to all, and the light is allowed to pour in. What a journey, right? It just goes to show you that a person's true worth is never, ever defined by their bank account or the labels other people try to stick on them. It's about character, integrity, and the quiet dignity with which you carry yourself, even in the face of disrespect. Liam didn't need to crush his father-in-law. He just needed to let the truth come to light, and Richard's own arrogance did the rest. I have to ask you guys, have you ever been in a situation where someone completely underestimated you? How did you handle it? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and your experiences give me so much inspiration. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and hit that subscribe button. We post stories like this all the time, stories about justice, redemption, and the quiet strength that lives inside all of us. Thank you for being here today, and we'll see you in the next one.